Think criminal power has always worn a male face. Think of the biggest kingpins in history and you probably picture men with weapons and money. But there's a truth the world tried to bury for decades, an ugly reality that Hollywood is only now starting to touch. Behind some of the most violent and ruthless empires in the history of substance trafficking, it wasn't men at the top, it was women. And they weren't side characters or decorative wives. They were the bosses, the strategists, the ones making decisions that cost lives and moved millions. These 10 women didn't just enter a world dominated by men. They took it over with a level of brutality that would make even the most feared bosses look tame. And their stories are so dark, so shocking, they'll change how you see who really controls the world of organized crime. We start with the woman who, in many ways, helped invent modern substance trafficking in the United States. Griselda Blanco wasn't just another criminal. She was the architect of an empire that turned Miami into a war zone in the 1970s and 80s. Born in Cartagena, Colombia in 1943, she grew up in extreme poverty in Medellin, where she committed her first killing at just 11 years old, when she allegedly took the life of a wealthy family's son after a failed kidnapping attempt. But that was only the beginning of a criminal career that would turn her into one of the most feared women in the Americas. Griselda pioneered something that seems obvious today, but back then was revolutionary, using pregnant women and sex workers as couriers to move white substance from Colombia into the United States. She designed special underwear with hidden compartments and built an entire transport network that moved tons every month. What truly set Griselda apart was her cruelty, without limits. She's been linked to more than 250 killings over the course of her career, and these weren't clean, quiet hits. Griselda wanted the spectacle. She ordered people taken out in shopping centers in broad daylight, pioneered the motorcycle hit style that would later become infamous in Colombia, and personally eliminated 3 of her husbands once they stopped being useful. During the Miami Substance War, the conflict she helped ignite, the city averaged 1 substance-related killing per day. Miami hospitals had to create special sections just for victims of trafficking-related violence. Griselda's empire brought in $80 million a month in Miami alone, money that would equal well over $300 million today after inflation. She was so powerful that Pablo Escobar, who later became the most infamous boss on the planet, was once her student. She taught him routes, methods, logistics. Without Griselda Blanco, the Medellin organization might never have existed. But Griselda made the mistake that takes down so many giants. She started using her own merchandise. The white substance made her erratic, paranoid, reckless. She began bragging, sharing details of her crimes with anyone who would listen, boasting about brutal methods and perfect eliminations. In 1985, the DEA finally caught her in California. She was sentenced to 15 years, but even behind bars, she tried to keep a grip on her empire. Her most loyal enforcer, Jorge Rivi Ayala, agreed to testify against her in exchange for a lighter sentence, revealing that he had personally taken out more than 30 people under direct orders from the boss. Griselda was released in 2004 and deported to Colombia. She spent her final years in Medellin, the city where it all began, until in 2012 a motorcycle gunman, using the exact method she'd pioneered decades earlier, shot her twice in the head outside a butcher shop. She was 69. The queen died wearing her own crown of thorns. While Griselda ruled Miami, another criminal legend was rising in Mexico, one born into power from the start. Sandra Avila Beltran, known as the Queen of the Pacific, didn't choose the world of substance trafficking. She was born into it. Her uncle was Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the founder of the Guadalajara organization, and widely seen as the godfather of modern Mexican substance trafficking. Sandra grew up surrounded by the most powerful men in the trade: Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies, the Arellano Felix brothers, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, Ismael El Mayo Zambada. They weren't business contacts. They were uncles, godfathers, the people who showed up at family parties. Born on October 11, 1960 in Mexicali, Sandra understood from her teenage years that her last name was a master key that could open any door in the criminal world. What's fascinating about Sandra is that she was never a street operator. She didn't move shipments or order eliminations. Her specialty was something more sophisticated and in many ways more dangerous: money. Sandra managed finances for the Sinaloa organization, cleaning millions through shell companies, real estate, and legitimate businesses. When she was captured in 2007, Mexican authorities accused her of coordinating an operation to move 30 tons of white substance into the United States and of being a key player within Sinaloa's operations. But Sandra was careful. Too careful. She left no direct evidence. Everything ran through layers of intermediaries, legal companies, offshore structures. Even her image worked in her favor. Sandra was elegant, striking, educated. She showed up in society pages, wore designer clothes, drove luxury cars. She didn't look like a criminal. She looked like a successful businesswoman. And on paper, technically, she was. The charges in Mexico couldn't be fully proven. She was extradited to the United States in 2012, where she eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser count, providing financial support to a substance trafficker. She received a reduced sentence and was released in 2015. But here's the unsettling part. Sandra has always insisted she wasn't a real trafficker, that she simply knew people in the criminal world because she grew up around them. When her son was kidnapped in 2002, she called the police, something no truly powerful cartel figure would do, because it would signal weakness. That led some investigators to question whether Sandra really held the power authorities claimed, or whether her name and family ties made her a convenient symbol. What's undeniable is this: Sandra Avila represents something rare, a woman who navigated Mexico's substance trafficking ecosystem for decades using intelligence, connections, and discretion, not violence. And in many ways, that makes her more dangerous than any trigger puller. Now we move north to the border between Mexico and the United States, where in the 1920s, a woman with no formal education built the first major Mexican trafficking organization, decades before the famous names ever appeared. Ignasia Jaso, known as La Nacha, is the forgotten grandmother of Mexican substance trafficking, the pioneer no one talks about but every modern boss should recognize. Alongside her husband, Pablo Gonzalez, known as El Pablote, Ignasia established near-total control over the trafficking of green substance, morphine, and poppy-based substance across the Ciudad Juarez-El Paso corridor. But La Nacha wasn't a helper. When El Pablote died in a bar fight in 1930, many believed the business would collapse. They were brutally wrong. Ignasia took control and expanded the empire. Her method of consolidating power was so ruthless it set a pattern many organizations would follow: extreme violence paired with systematic corruption. The night she decided to wipe out the competition, Chinese immigrant groups who controlled part of the trade in Juarez, Ignasia ordered an operation that left 11 people eliminated in the streets. It was a massacre that sent a clear message. La Nacha didn't share territory, but her real genius was understanding something criminals would take decades to perfect. Without official protection, no criminal empire survives. Ignasia bribed high-ranking military figures, state police, customs officials. She built the first network of institutional corruption tied to substance trafficking in Mexico. Her organization was the first to fully control distribution routes, what had previously been a fragmented market shared by smaller groups. La Nacha operated with near-total impunity for decades, going in and out of prison whenever political pressure demanded an arrest to appease the United States. By 1943, when she was finally sent to the Islas Marias penal colony by order of the Supreme Court, she had already established a business model that would outlive her. Her organization kept operating into the 1970s, long after she stepped back. Ignasia Jaso died in relative obscurity, but her legacy is undeniable. She proved that a woman without education, without elite family connections, could build and maintain a criminal empire in a world completely dominated by men and keep it going for more than 40 years. La Nacha was the first, and that makes her singular on this list. From Mexico, we travel to Guatemala, where in the early 2000s an organization rose that the DEA considered among the most prolific in Central America. And at the top wasn't a man. It was Marlory Dadiana Shakon Rosel, known as La Reina del Sur, though her real story is far more complex and brutal than any soap opera. From the remote Copan region on the Honduras-Guatemala border, Marlory and her family built a distribution hub that moved tons of white substance from South America toward the United States, overland through Guatemala and Mexico, and by sea across the Caribbean. What set the Vale organization, the family name, apart was a lethal combination of extreme violence and corruption that reached into government levels. Marlory wasn't the public face of the group. She was the strategist in the shadows. While her brothers ran ground operations, she coordinated logistics, routes, alliances. And the alliances she secured were serious. The Vale network built a direct connection to the Sinaloa organization, Mexico's most powerful structure. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman even hid for a time in Vale-controlled territory when pressure in Mexico became unbearable. That relationship gave Marlory access to distribution networks spanning an entire continent. U.S. prosecutors estimate her organization moved more than $200 million between 2003 and 2014. Other reports suggest the real number may have exceeded $5 billion, making it one of the most lucrative operations in the history of Central American substance trafficking. What finally brought Marlory down was what has toppled so many powerful figures: betrayal. In 2014, she was arrested in Miami by U.S. authorities. She faced 26 years in prison for substance trafficking and money laundering. But Marlory made a decision that changed everything. She became a star cooperating witness for the United States. For 2 years, while released under an agreement connected to the DEA, she met with agents and prosecutors more than 50 times in 6 different countries, handing over details about operations, routes, contacts, and methods that dismantled entire networks in Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. Her cooperation led to the arrests of dozens of major traffickers. In return, her sentence was slashed, first from 26 years to 12, then down to 5. In 2019, she was released on bail. Today, Marlory is serving a 94-year sentence in Guatemala, inside the VIP area of the Santa Teresa Women's Detention Center, for crimes committed in her country. But her cooperation with the United States helped break apart empires that had operated for decades. The real Queen of the South didn't get a romantic ending. She got the ending that comes to those who choose survival over loyalty. While Marlory bargained for freedom, another woman was rising in Mexico, one whose brutality was so extreme that even hardened criminals considered it too much. Melissa Margarita Calderon Ohada, known as La China, wasn't a cartel boss or a financial operator. She was something far more terrifying, one of the deadliest female hitwomen Mexico has produced. Born on August 12, 1984, Melissa entered the criminal world young, specifically joining Las Fuerzas Especiales de los Damaso, the armed wing working for the Sinaloa organization under the orders of Damaso Lopez Núñez. And she quickly proved she didn't just belong, she could outdo the men. Melissa led a group of 50 gunmen controlling operations in La Paz and Los Cabos, Baja California Sur. But her rise was savage. She has been linked to between 150 and 170 direct killings, and those are only the confirmed ones. Her preferred method was harsh interrogation to extract information, followed by eliminations designed to send a message. Reports claim that on one occasion, Melissa took out a rival and cut off both arms before ending his life as a warning. In another case, she organized the kidnapping of the girlfriend of a rival figure nicknamed El Tocho. putting her through violent interrogation to extract information about enemy operations. The violence unleashed in Baja California Sur between 2014 and 2015 was so intense that the region, known for tourist beaches and luxury resorts, recorded 178 trafficking-related killings in a single year. What eventually destroyed La China wasn't the police. It was the cartel structure itself. When higher-ups replaced her as leader of the special forces, Melissa didn't accept being pushed aside. She formed her own criminal group, the Cartel California Sur, with her partner Pedro Hector Gomez, known as El Chino, as her second-in-command. They launched a territorial war against their former bosses, recruiting 300 street dealers who rode red motorcycles through La Paz. But her leadership became toxic. She promised bi-weekly pay of 7,000 pesos and didn't deliver. She handed out bags of white substance as bonuses to those who performed well, but she also had people eliminated when they failed. In 2015, during an operation in the Bella Vista neighborhood of La Paz, authorities captured El Chino. Under interrogation, he gave detailed information about Melissa, including her phone number. 3 of her own gunmen also turned on her, openly frustrated with her leadership and willing to cooperate. On October 5, 2015, Melissa Margarita Calderon Ohada was finally arrested. In 2025, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison for homicide. The woman who spread terror for a decade is now serving time, but her legacy remains. In the violent world of substance trafficking, gender doesn't matter. Brutality has no gender. Now we return to a different kind of story. One where violence isn't the main weapon, but intelligence and survival instincts are. Enedina Arellano Felix never set out to lead an organization, but the death and arrest of all her brothers left her as the last one standing in one of Mexico's most powerful criminal structures. The Tijuana Organization. Born on April 12, 1961 in Mazatlan, Sinaloa, Enedina grew up in a family that would create one of the most violent and ruthless groups in the history of Mexican substance trafficking. Her brothers, Benjamin, Ramon, Francisco Javier, and Eduardo, built an empire that throughout the 80s and 90s controlled the Tijuana border, one of the most lucrative routes into the United States. But Enedina wasn't like her brothers. While they chased fame and dominance through violence, she worked in the shadows as the organization's accountant and logistics operator. She handled the finances, cleaned the money, set up front companies, managed shipping logistics. She was the cold, calculated brain keeping the business running while her brothers fought brutal territorial wars against the Sinaloa organization led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. One by one, her brothers fell. Ramon was taken out in 2002. Benjamin was arrested that same year. Francisco Javier, known as El Tigrillo, was detained in 2006 by the U.S. Coast Guard while fishing on a yacht and sentenced to 23.5 years in prison. Eduardo was arrested in 2008. Suddenly, Enedina was the only free Arellano Felix with full knowledge of the organization's operations. In 2008, the DEA identified her as the most powerful woman in the global world of substance trafficking and the leader of the Tijuana organization. Mexico's Public Security Ministry acknowledged it as the only confirmed case of a woman leading a major trafficking organization in the country. But the empire she inherited was already collapsing. The war with Sinaloa had left more than 2,000 people eliminated or disappeared. The territory was fractured. Revenue had dropped sharply. Enedina, alongside Manuel Aguirre Galindo, known as El Caballo, tried to keep operations alive, but the true power of the Tijuana organization had already faded. Victor Clark, director of Tijuana's Binational Center for Human Rights, explained that Enedina was in front for inheritance reasons, for the family's need to maintain control, not because she actively sought power. What's extraordinary about Enedina is that she has never been captured. Today in 2025, she remains free, operating from the shadows, keeping such a low profile that there are barely any verified photographs of her. Some investigators believe she no longer controls any significant criminal operations. Others think she's simply so smart that she's learned to operate without leaving traces. What can't be disputed is what Enedina Arellano Felix represents. A woman who inherited a ruined empire and managed not only to survive, but to stay free while every man in her family is either dead or behind bars. In a world where the average lifespan of a cartel boss is 5 years, Enedina has lasted decades. That isn't luck, that's skill. From cartel bosses, we move into a different category: facilitators. Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia, known as La Patrona, was never the public face of the Sinaloa organization, but for decades, she was one of its most important pieces. Born in Michoacán, Guadalupe crossed into the United States without documents in the 1990s, where she began selling illegal substances in California. She was arrested and spent 10 years in U.S. prison before being deported to Mexico. Most people would think that experience would push her away from the criminal world. It pulled her deeper in. Back in Mexico, Guadalupe became an official money cleaner for the Sinaloa organization. Her specialty was brilliant in its simplicity. She received cash generated from substance sales in Los Angeles and transferred it to Guadalajara through currency exchange houses that kept a 3% commission. Court statements reveal that between 2009 and 2010, Guadalupe helped move 1,587 pounds of green substance, about 227 kilos, along with an average of 30 kilograms of white substance distributed to various clients in the Los Angeles area. But those numbers were only a fraction of what she really handled. As one of the highest-ranking women in Sinaloa's financial structure, Guadalupe had access to and control over cash flows estimated in the tens of millions of dollars per month. She was arrested in February 2016 in Culiacan, Sinaloa, just weeks after Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was captured in the same city. A year later, in 2017, she was extradited to the United States in Chicago, where she faced charges in what was described as one of the most important state cases against the Sinaloa organization. The accusations laid out how the organization used jumbo jets, underground tunnels, and even submarines to smuggle massive quantities of substances into the United States. Manuel Fernandez Valencia, Guadalupe's brother and also part of the operation, was sentenced in 2016 to 27 years in prison. But Guadalupe made a different choice. She cooperated with U.S. authorities. Her testimony and the information she provided supported DEA investigations into Mexican organizations and helped trigger multiple major arrests. In exchange, in December 2021, she was sentenced to just 10 years. With time served since her 2016 capture, plus reductions for good behavior and cooperation, Guadalupe Fernandez Valencia was released only months ago in 2024. She spent 3 decades involved in substance trafficking, survived 2 arrests in 2 different countries, and ultimately negotiated her freedom by providing information that helped dismantle significant parts of the very organization that enriched her. La Patrona understood a brutal truth. In the criminal world, loyalty is a currency, spent the moment freedom is on the line. Now we reach a woman whose story is more complicated and controversial because her role in this world wasn't as an operator but as a wife, messenger, and facilitator. Emma Coronel Aispuro was born in Santa Clara, California, but grew up in the tiny community of La Angostura, just a few dozen residents, in the golden triangle of substance trafficking in northern Mexico. She met Joaquin El Chapo Guzman when she was 17 at a local party where she was participating as a beauty contest candidate. On her 18th birthday, she married Mexico's most powerful cartel boss in a symbolic ceremony at her family ranch. It wasn't an official civil marriage, but it was real in every way that mattered. Emma insists she never witnessed the violence associated with substance trafficking and never participated in her husband's criminal activities. But U.S. prosecutors tell a different story. According to the allegations, Emma worked closely with the Sinaloa organization's command and control structure, acting as a messenger between El Chapo and other members while he was being held at Mexico's Altiplano prison after his 2014 arrest. More seriously, she was accused of taking part in El Chapo's dramatic 2015 escape from that maximum security facility, when a nearly 1-mile tunnel was dug to his cell, allowing him to flee on a motorcycle through the underground passage. Emma was arrested in February 2021 at Dulles International Airport near Washington, D.C., 2 years after her husband was sentenced to life in prison by a New York court. The charges included conspiracy to distribute illegal substances, money laundering, and helping operate her husband's multi-billion-dollar criminal empire. In November 2021, as part of a deal with federal prosecutors, Emma pleaded guilty to 3 federal offenses. Prosecutors asked for 4 years, but she received 3. Some legal experts called the sentence surprisingly light for someone linked to an organization like Sinaloa. Emma served 2.5 years before being released in September 2023 for good behavior. What's fascinating about Emma Coronel is what she represents: a new generation of women connected to substance trafficking who don't fit the stereotype of brutal bosses or street enforcers. They're facilitators, messengers, money cleaners, operating in the shadows through family and personal connections. In recent interviews for an Oxygen documentary released in November 2025, Emma wonders what her life would have looked like if she hadn't married El Chapo at 18. She apologizes to victims of trafficking-related violence, saying she stands with those who have lost loved ones. But she never admits direct involvement in violent crimes. Emma has turned notoriety into a kind of celebrity, appearing at Milan Fashion Week as she tries to restart her modeling career. It's a complicated narrative that makes her real role hard to classify. A victim of circumstances, an active participant, an opportunist who used her connections? Most likely all 3 at once. Our final story may be the strangest, and it shows how these networks recruit in unexpected places. Angie S Clemente Valencia was crowned International Coffee Queen in Colombia. She was a professional model, beautiful with a promising career in entertainment. But behind the runways and photo shoots, Angie led one of the largest criminal crews in the world focused on moving substances through human couriers. Her operation recruited young women, many of them models or aspiring models, to transport white substance from South America into Europe, specifically through Argentina and Spain. The method was sophisticated. The women traveled with suitcases specially modified with hidden compartments, or in some cases swallowed capsules of white substance and carried them inside their bodies. Angie lived in Argentina for a time, where authorities eventually linked her to a network moving kilos of illegal merchandise every week. The irony is that it was her own vanity that gave her away. Angie posted photos on Facebook with her little dog Lulu, and those images revealed her location. Interpol issued a warrant, and in 2010 she was arrested in Buenos Aires. During her trial, Angie never fully admitted responsibility. She insisted she was involved but not the leader, that she knew what was happening but didn't run it. She was sentenced in Argentina to 6 years and 8 months in prison for substance trafficking. She served half the sentence before the court applied a legal removal process under immigration law and expelled her from the country in 2013. Back in Colombia, Angie became a minor celebrity, giving interviews where she eventually acknowledged her involvement, saying she was complicit in something deeply wrong because illegal substances destroy lives. What makes Angie S Clemente Valencia's story unique is that it reflects a relatively newer phenomenon in substance trafficking, recruiting middle and upper-class women, educated, respectable, looking to operate within international distribution networks. They don't fit the traditional criminal profile. They can travel internationally without raising suspicion. They have clean passports, believable stories, trustworthy appearances. And that's exactly why they're extremely valuable to organizations that need to move illegal merchandise across borders and through airports, with increasingly strict security. Angie became the visible face of an operation that likely involved dozens of women in similar situations, many of whom were never caught. These 10 women represent different faces of female involvement in substance trafficking across a full century. From Ignasia Jaso, the pioneer who established the blueprint in the 1920s, to Emma Coronel, the modern facilitator who relied more on personal connections than violence. From Griselda Blanco, whose brutality defined an era of trafficking in the United States, to Enedina Arellano Felix, the heir who survived after every man in her family fell. From hit women like Melissa La China, whose violence rivaled any man's, to financial operators like Guadalupe La Patrona, whose true power was in her ability to move and clean money. What they all share is that they shattered the myth that substance trafficking is exclusively male. They proved women can be just as brutal, just as intelligent, just as ruthless, and just as successful at building and sustaining criminal empires. Some did it through extreme violence, others through financial intelligence. Some inherited power. Others built it from nothing. But all of them permanently changed the narrative about who really controls the world of organized crime. And their stories, many of which are only now being told through series, documentaries, and books, reveal an uncomfortable truth. Criminal power never had a gender. We only had the illusion that it did. These queens ruled violent empires with the same efficiency as any king, and in many cases with far more devastating results. Their names deserve to be remembered, not as heroes but as reminders that humanity's capacity for violence, ambition, and power has no gender limits. And that, perhaps, is the darkest lesson of all.